Well, good day, Faith family, and greetings to all of you. Glad to be with you again for another Sunday School update as we are rapidly approaching the end of this quarter, of the fall quarter, and that means the end of Ecclesiastes. We're looking at chapter 10 today, verses 16 all the way through chapter 11, verse 6, discussing miscellaneous wisdom. Miscellaneous wisdom, and hearing the words of Solomon again talking to us about the wisdom that he is observing. Remember that those observational proverbs, those experiential proverbs, but as well as just general proverbial wisdom that he's going to give us by way of instruction and even by way of command. So, as I said, we're rapidly approaching the end. Next quarter, beginning with December, we're going to be looking at the life of Abraham in Genesis. I believe it's Genesis chapter 12, going all the way through chapter 25. I put out a text yesterday. If you are interested in a scripture journal, and what that looks like is something like this. And it's just a small journal like this. Of course, Genesis is going to be a little larger, but it is gratefully helpful to be able to map out, as you see some of that I do. A lot of what you see me do here on the update on screen, I've actually already done in my scripture journal. And so it's a great way to be able to study the text. And of course, the text is right there, so you can mark it up, write your observations, your interpretation, and application there, and make notes, and take them with you to Sunday school. They're great tools to be used for, as well as sermon note taking. But if you are interested in one of those scripture journals, please either reply to the text that I sent yesterday or just let me know. Contact me and let me know that you would want one of those by Friday. It's a $5 cost, or if you just want to make a donation to the book table, that'd be great as well. All right, well, let's dive right into the text today and see if we can learn and live some. Ecclesiastes chapter 10, verse 16, all the way through chapter 11, verse 6, talking about miscellaneous wisdom. So let's dive into the text. All right, here we are. If we remind ourselves just a little bit from where we left off in verses 12 through 15, Solomon was talking about distinguishing between the wise and the foolish. And he spent some time talking about the foolish person and some of their characteristics, some of their qualities, how we can recognize a foolish person, and also, too, how we can prevent ourselves from being foolish. And the Bible does not grant much grace to someone who is intentionally foolish. And of course, that is the Bible equates a foolish person as someone who is a sinner. Remember, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. So it's not being degrading or anything of that nature. But what it is doing is identifying someone who is a sinner, someone who is unrighteous and unwilling to hear and to heed the words of God that are being instructed to us by Scripture. So that's where he ends in verses 12 through 15. Now we pick up with verse 16, and we're going to see some more of these, again, as your author titles it, miscellaneous wisdom. And so basically what that means is there's going to be a verse here and a verse there, talking maybe about different things, maybe about connected things, but it's all statements of wisdom. So it's a little difficult in our reading, but I think by the time we're through, you'll see the connection here all around. Now look at there in verse 16 as we begin, where Solomon says, "Woe to you." He begins with a woe. Woe to you. Now it's interesting on what he's talking about there. Anytime the word woe is used, that is generally not a good thing. The word woe refers to a lament or a despair. It's reminiscent of chapter 10, verse 5, where Solomon talks about that the roles were reversed. The nobility were serving in the position of slaves, and the slaves were serving in the position of nobility, and it was causing an upheaval in the government structure. Things were not operating right. In short, the unqualified were serving in positions of power, and this was leading to chaos. So look at how he describes this. Same type thing in verse 16. He says, "Woe to you, O land, when your king is a child." Okay, and what does he mean by that? He means child, but he means immature. "And your princes feast in the morning." Now, he's not talking about, as your author mentions, and I like the example he gave, he's not talking about breakfast. He's referring to the feast. Now, in those days, you had feasts that would often take place. They would start in the afternoon and go into the wee hours of the morning. But then if it truly was a feasting occasion, it would lead to much gluttony, much drunkenness, acts of sin, and it would even be taking place in the morning. So this was looked upon not as a good thing. So he's saying this is what's happening in the land, and whoever this happens to, woe to them, woe to the land, woe to the people. But now he contrasts and says, "Happy are you, O land, when your king," look here, "is the son of nobility." In other words, when things are functioning as they should, and your princes feast at the proper time for strength and not for drunkenness. So here, this is our indicator that what he's referring to in terms of the feast in the morning. Okay, so we need to take note of that there was a proper time to do things. There was a proper time where things should take place. And so this is one of those, feasting. When does it take place? It's used for strength. It's used to regain your strength, to be able to go back out on the battlefield, not for drunkenness. All right, so now we'll move on to verse 18, because now he's going to change tunes a little bit, and he gives an observational wisdom. He says, "Through sloth, the roof sinks in." Through slothfulness, laziness, indolence, the house leaks. Okay, so it's just a general statement for us that says that laziness brings about problems in the home, in the house, and so it's in a physical nature. Moving on, verse 19. "Bread is made for laughter, and wine gladdens life, and money answers everything." Now this is a little bit could be a little bit tricky for us, because Solomon has mentioned earlier how money can be a problem, and that when it's the constant pursuit of money, thinking that it solves all of our problems. That is what he says earlier, that there is an issue with, and that is not the case, that it causes us to lose sight of life, to lose sight of enjoyment. However, he's not saying that money is bad overall. Again, if we bring in other scriptures, money is money in and of itself is not evil, but it's our greed that becomes the root of this. It becomes our desire to have nothing but money, to have more and more, to never be content. That's what causes this issue. So what is he doing here? He's giving a general observation and observational wisdom here. Bread, what's it made for? It's made for feasting. It's made for laughter, for a time of gathering to feed us. Wine, it brings gladness to our hearts and to our life. Okay, it's used in terms of feasting, not in the sense of drunkenness. He's not saying here. He's saying just in general, these are what these things are used for. But you're not going to have them. You're not going to have sustenance. Remember, if you go back up to the real purpose of feasting, to provide strength, you're not going to have sustenance if you don't have money. And so that's what he's getting at. So again, though it can be used for evil, Solomon is stating the general reality that money does ease some problems. I like what Dave Ramsey says on this. He says, money won't solve all your problems, but it sure helps. So this goes back to just the general preparations of life and taking care of your household and providing for your household. Now let's look at verse 20. Here we're talking about slander. He says, even in your thoughts, do not curse the king, nor in your bedroom curse the rich. And these would be somewhat equivalent: the rich, nobility, the king, people in power. For a bird of the air will carry your voice, or some winged creature will tell the matter. We can bring in some other scriptures here, as your author does. We think about Ephesians 4, verse 31, where he says, let all slander, let all evil talk be put away from you. The Christian is to have no evil talk within his mouth, and especially no slander. For he says, you will be found out. In some way or the other, your slander will come out. So be aware of that. Get into verse 1 of chapter 11. He says now he's going to talk about diversity of investments. So he's kind of all over the place here, but we'll get a general summation here in just a moment. Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Give a portion to 7 or even to 8. For you know not what, and here's a key phrase, you know not what disaster may happen on earth. Again, he's saying that disasters happen. We don't know when they're going to come. We don't know what they're going to be, but we do know that they are coming. So we need to be sure and be good stewards. We need to diversify our investments. Sorry, my penmanship is a little off today. But what do we mean by that? Well, in common sense terms, we need to not put all of our eggs in one basket. We need to make preparations for disaster that may be able to come, so that we can manage our home, but also, as we'll see later, help others, be able to be a blessing and to be able to help others. Now he gets into the disasters a little bit. He says, if the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves on the earth. And if a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it will lie. He's just a general observation. This is just the way that life is. However, he goes, he who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. What is he getting at there? He's saying, don't be idle. That if we sit around and we depend upon the world to determine to us when we are to act and when we are to do our daily duties, we will never do them. Okay? We're not to be like the farmer in this regard, who always watches the weather. But rather we are to continue on with our daily lives, fully realizing that disasters will happen, that the weather will change, the weather will come, things will happen, but it is not to deter us from our duties and calling in life, which is ultimately to glorify God. So what does that mean? Eat, drink, and be merry. Remember that? Be about our daily task, not allowing the world's distractions to detain you or to distract you or to inhibit you. Don't be idle. Don't wait around for the world to get just right before you're going to accomplish what you need to do and what God has commanded you to do. Despite uncertainty, despite not knowing things, there's no not what. We're going to see this another time. Again, in verse 5, knowing you do not know the way. But he says, continue on, glorify God despite your uncertainty. One of the things your author says that I loved, it was a quote. He says, God can certainly manage the risk involved in you doing the right thing. Therefore, reject being paralyzed by fear. Commit your way to the Lord and do what you know is responsible and right. What is he saying here? Obey God. Serve the king. And be about your life. And live peaceably. We talked about this a little bit on Sunday night at the campfire service. Live peaceably. So let's move on, because he's going to reiterate this one more time. He says, as you do not know the way the Spirit comes to the bones in the womb of a woman with child, so you do not know the work of God who makes everything. There again, he's given the attribute of God. God is the creator of all. Now, we know a lot more about what goes on with a child in the womb. Of course, we have to put this in context here. They did not have the medical advances that we have today. But again, at the end of the day, when it comes right down to it about how a child is created, we do not know. Okay, when we get into the intricacies of it, it's very similar to regeneration. What is it exactly that God does? And how does he do it? We don't know. But we do know the God who makes everything. So what does that mean? Continue on with our life. He says, in the morning, sow your seed. And at evening, withhold not your hand, for you do not know which will prosper, this or that, or whether both alike will be good. This is, beloved, the life of faith. This is the life of faith that we are to live. That the author of Hebrews describes in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. He says, faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. What are we to live for? We are to live for the resurrection. We are to live for Christ, for that day when Christ returns for us. And so in the meantime, we're to be about the duties that God gives us. We're to live peaceably. We're to gather regularly for church and for worship. And we're to obey God, no matter the cost. I love that quote. God is big enough to manage the risk involved in us doing the right thing. That's a life of faith, beloved. He is going to take care of us, no matter what. And we're to live for him on this earth, obeying him, obeying his word, submitting to his will and his way, being good citizens, glorifying him in all that we say and do, not being idle, not being slothful, not being lazy, but continuing on until that day that he either calls us home or he returns for his children. What a great thing to look forward to. I want to reference to you real quickly, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. Read Paul's encouragement to the church at Thessalonica, and that we talked about that again on Sunday night. So just read that as well for some cross reference there. All right, we're going to end there today. I'm looking so forward to meeting with you on this Lord's Day and for our Thanksgiving worship service, Thanksgiving Day worship and praise service, and then our fellowship with one another afterwards, enjoying a meal together. Take care, God bless, and have a wonderful rest of the day, and I will see you this coming Lord's Day.